wanted to go to a different oil company or pursue different kinds of opportunities. And so they let us in to try to help them understand what some of those reasons and motives were, so that they could do more to retain their talent, their scientific and engineering talent. So we went in, and during the first few years of the study, we were able to monitor voluntary attrition. Very few people left, but the ones that did so because they wanted to pursue better opportunities at other firms. They weren't leaving the industry, they were going to other firms where they had better opportunities. Or they didn't want to live in Houston anymore, so they found a place to live in Midland, a company that would hire them there, for example, or Colorado, or other places where the industry has a presence. So that was fine. And then after the layoffs happened, when the market started to come up again, a number of people left then. They more or less waited until their raises or bonuses finally came through after a period of austerity. They had survived several rounds of layoffs, but they basically decided to leave once the firm was on a steadier level, once the layoffs had stopped and once the price of oil started going up again. Now, they left because they were completely demoralized, and they were really unhappy with the way the firm had handled the layoffs. They considered it inhumane, incredibly stressful to have lived through, a number of years of watching their colleagues basically get marched out the door and treated like criminals. And so for them, the company's behavior during the downturn was absolutely key in their decision to voluntarily leave. So the lesson, I think, that's there for companies, that if you really want to do something about voluntary attrition, treat people well. Don't treat them like they're, disposable. We're talking about professionals. We're talking about scientists and engineers who are doing their job well and being treated like they're trespassing from one day to the next. And even the people who are retained just felt that was too much, that they weren't treating their coworkers well, and they jumped at the first chance to leave once the industry started to stabilize. And, that's all voluntary attrition. Sociologists and economists would lump both groups together. But my point is that if companies really want to do something to stem voluntary attrition, that's what they have to do. Now, involuntary attrition, they don't want to stem that. They definitely want to be in charge of deciding who gets to stay and who gets to leave.
Right. And it's interesting that you talk about the treatment of people, because I know when I first came to the US, and I may have mentioned this, in previous sessions, but I first came to the US, I was kind of dumbfounded by the way that people were often treated when they were let go. And I remember one of the very first opportunities that I had to, I believe, to add value. And I think there were other good people who assisted me in that process. Was in one of the first companies that I worked in. The person who was in charge of HR at the time really wanted to. She was planning on letting people go over the phone, and it was on a Friday evening after they had left work, and I was just horrified. I had come from a background where I was actually trained in the format of, how do you do it? How do you let people go well? If you can do that. But the most important thing was always with dignity. And I thought, how do you let people who've worked in the office one moment be let go, either by standing in a room, and I'd heard that experience as well, where people were told, they were all brought into, 60 people were brought into a room at a time and told, well, no longer have a job. And I just thought that we can't continue to treat people like that. So I think you raise a really good point that it's not just behaviour during the actual time of someone's transition out of a business, but it's how do you treat them during that process? How do they see others being treated? So I think that's really critical. One of the things that I really wanted to ask you is that this whole concept of the boom and bust cycle and how it impacts women, and that women do bear the brunt of layoffs, even though men and women are let go. Do you think that with the energy transition that this will change? Do you think that because of the need for more and new and different talent, the fact that people can be, redeveloped in certain skills, or that they need new skills, or they need more of a specific type of skill, that the energy transition will see a better behaviour of companies towards women, and towards treating women who've had to, through the pandemic, have been forced to stay at home, look after children and work? What are your feelings about that, Christine?
Yeah, I think that's such a great topic to speculate about. I don't know about how electricity and other industries aside from oil and gas associated with energy, how volatile they are. I mean, the thing that really stands out about oil and gas, and I think it's similar with high tech, is just how volatile this industry is, which means that funding, the price of the, barrel of oil, that has so much geopolitical foundations and variables that affect it, results in, well, at least in the way it's organized in this country, these very radical ups and, I mean, can you believe that it was less than 2 years ago that oil was like below $20 a barrel? I mean, and now it's I didn't look today, but it's around 120. It's like, how that volatility and the way that industries organize themselves, companies organize themselves so that it's workers who bear the brunt of those swings. That's the problem with the industry. Now, whether electricity or renewables are going to have that same characteristic, I don't know. I mean, they seem more stable. Now, that said, Denise, I know you're there in Houston, and I live in Austin. During the horrible power outage that happened last year when it was so cold, there was all sorts of investigations, who's to blame for this. My understanding is that, and I need to verify this, but my understanding from a very reputable source is that very few people in leadership positions lost their jobs as a result of that crisis, with the exception of one prominent woman. So when heads had to roll, they found the woman. So women have this kind of scapegoat aspect to us, where we're seen as like not as critically important to the industry. I mean, and that goes across the board probably. So that when heads have to roll, it's going to be a female head. So I guess to answer your question, Denise, it really has to do with volatility in my mind. How volatile is the industry, and how much can the industry rely on layoffs to steady the ship when they're dealing with these exogenous shocks?
Yeah, and then that really brings into the discussion the whole question of expertise around organisational design to actually create an organisation which can ride through those ups and downs because of the volatility. You talk about women potentially being the scapegoats. What is this actually telling us? You raise in your book the question of gendered organisational theory, which in probably many other books on oil and gas we wouldn't get to even hear about, let alone discuss. But I think I think it's really valid, because until we don't understand what sits behind a lot of what's going on, it's been my mantra for a number of years now. It's very hard then for us to, it's not about fixing ourselves all the time. It's not about just deciding, the great type of individual that we're going to be to contribute, because sometimes, our value to an organization, no matter how much we think we're giving, it's still not enough, and we still let go. But if we can just take up that question of gendered organization theory, where companies prefer to hire workers with few distractions outside of work. I mean, that's a very simple way of kind of saying it, but ultimately it's true. And in your findings, in your research, the women who stayed were often women who didn't have children, so they didn't have distractions outside of work. And that's not a negative towards those women. It's just a reality, whether they made that by choice or any other reason. So, but what it does mean is that those choices for men and for women is very different. For women, it means for a lot of women, it actually does mean not having children, or having such a big safeguard to take care of those children that perhaps men don't even have to think about. How did you see that gendered organization theory playing out?
Well, you just hit the nail on the head. I mean, women with young children in particular were really penalized during the period of layoffs. I mean, they were targeted, and everybody knew it. And you know, I gotta say, the company got around sort of the legal ramifications of that by making people like sign an agreement not to sue them as a condition to receive their severance. So this is kind of a crafty thing, again, behind the scenes, that's going on in order to prevent any kind of litigation around this issue, because this is clearly illegal behavior. I mean, we have laws in this country that prevent gender discrimination and discrimination on the basis of parenting status. So they did this. Your question is, what can we do to prevent companies from doing this? It's almost like the $10 million question. It's like there's got to be a way in which companies limit the number of hours that are expected of workers. And, some countries, excuse me, have done this. It's a 38-hour work limit in France. I mean, there's ways that people get around it, but you're not allowed to work more than 38 hours. And I think that something similar to that would have to be implemented, some kind of restriction. Unfortunately, we're going in the opposite direction, where we're sort of lifting all limits on people's ability to work, and the pandemic has in many ways made it worse. I mean, there's an article in the paper today about how even if you're sick, if you're working from home, the expectation is you'd work while you're sick. You don't even have a sick day anymore. So I think that there's like there'd have to be such a cultural change in our expectations of what's a reasonable work day and a reasonable number of hours to devote to work for us to really, challenge that assumption that the ideal worker norm is the best, the one that can be unconditionally devoted to work. That said, I mean, it's so ironic. It's like the men in our study who had children, they actually benefited from having children compared to men who didn't have children. In other words, having a kid, if you were a man, was almost like the equivalent of getting a whole bump up in a 5-point rating system, and really enabled them to be retained much more than the single men. So parenthood is actually a benefit for men, I think, based on the assumption that as fathers, they're going to be working longer hours and they have, a wife and mother at home to take care of the domestic work.
Yeah, and I think part of that, if you're talking about trying to find a solution, part of the answer at least lies in how many women do we have on boards, and how many women do we have at the executive level, particularly in oil and gas. And at the time of your writing, I think you had one CEO in 2018 on a publicly listed company. Now, we also know that there are many startups now where you do have many more women perhaps in those leadership positions. So it'll be interesting to see, but that's by kind of just by happenstance. It's not by, by critical mass occurring or by the desire for critical mass to occur, because, you'll only change culture once the culture is defined by the people who are seem to be making the decisions. And at the moment, we still have many more men than we have women. And
Yeah,
so
no, I agree that critical mass is really important, but I also think that, and I mean, this may sound politically incorrect, I'm not sure, but a lot of times women who do make it into leadership positions, they're not necessarily friendly to other women, and that's part of how they're chosen. I think a lot of times the men in positions of power want women who are willing to discriminate against women. They have to sort of prove their bona fides in the boardroom, that they're willing to make, hard decisions that negatively impact women. And if they're not willing to do that, if they stand up and they say things that are feminist in a board meeting, well, they're out of there before you can sneeze. It's like it's part of the vetting process that only women, at least in these big corporations, who can prove themselves not feminist, that they can get ahead. Which is, one of the reasons why Sheryl Sandberg was so interesting. The foremother of the Lean In movement.
yes.
She was such a prominent woman, but I mean, what's the story there? I mean, now she's leaving. I see all this speculation about what's going on because, like I said, I mean, the tech industry is not quite as bad as oil and gas, but it's a close second when it comes to, how male dominated it is and how few opportunities there are for women in leadership.
Right. And I know that you raised a number of things that you've talked about just in that particular part of the conversation in your book, which I think is quite interesting. It's quite interesting to us at Lean In Energy as well, given that we're part of that, we're affiliated at least to the Lean In organisation. And that question about, what will Sheryl do and how is she going to do it is something that is interesting many of us, and the reasoning behind it, etc. So I think you raise a real interesting number of points. I think the other aspect that I wanted to touch on was, and I'm very mindful of the fact that we've got some great comments. I know Linda has been offering some great comments in the chat around the amount of money that's spent on companies protecting themselves legally, etc. And for those of us who've been in the industry, we know how that works. What I wanted to ask you as well was about, you discussed the new economy, and I find that a very interesting piece of discussion, because on the face of it, when you look at the fact that this new kind of organizational logic, which is the new economy, that characterizes how the 21st century workplace looks, it has increased job precariousness. We've got more interdisciplinary teams. We have career maps, more individualized career mapping. We have, the concept of how important networking is, and that's already been something that we've touched on in previous things that we've spoken about. And Michelle, I see your hand, and I'm going to get to you in a minute, so please hang on. So why does the new economy have a potential negative impact on women in the workplace? Because on the face of it, you might think, well, here's some opportunities for women, to come into their own. So why do you think that it's potentially not as positive as it might look?
Yeah, it's a great question because I agree with you on the face of it. When there are these kind of radical changes in workplace organization, it opens opportunities for different groups that were previously excluded from the ways that companies were organized before. So we talk about like the Fordist era, named after Henry Ford, when everybody was expected to basically go through their career in a kind of lockstep fashion. You get an entry-level position, you have loyalty to your firm, you get rewarded with promotions, raises, there's a career ladder that's basically the same for everyone. That system wasn't very friendly to women. That system was very exclusionary. And for a long time, sociologists thought that was really key to understanding why industries like oil and gas were so male dominated. So now we have this new organizational form where there's a great deal of precarity, where professionals, even in this industry, expect only to spend 3 or 4 or 5 years with one company, where there's a kind of fluidity with the team structure. So it's more project based and you're evaluated often by your peers, people with similar credentials to your own, instead of like a removed manager or supervisor. All of that sounds like it would tap into certain more feminine attributes or traits, like purportedly women are better collaborators, that we tend not to put ego first. All of those things seem compatible. We tend to have a less unilateral career progression. It's more in and out of the labor force, that kind of thing. So you'd think it would be really good for us, but this is why sociology can really be helpful, because we can come in and actually investigate, well, what are women's experiences in these teams? What have their experiences been with networking? Have they managed to find mentors to help them craft a career map that will lead them to leadership or whatever outcomes they desire? When they step out for having a child, is it easy to on-ramp to come back in? What have their experiences actually been like? And what I found in oil and gas is that each one of these things pose barriers to women. It's not easy to engage in the kind of self-promotion that you need when you're a member of a team in order to get recognition for your work. Women's networks tend to be much less powerful than men's networks are, often by design. In other words, yes, absolutely. I would hope that these changes in the economy would benefit women, but at least insofar as this industry is concerned, I don't see them as leading towards women's advancement.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that the whole issue of there's potential, but then you've also got to look at what systems and structures are still in place despite the changes that are occurring, because those things often lag, and it's in that lag that often the same issues continue to occur. So we might, Michelle, would you like to speak and let us know what you're thinking, or perhaps a question?
Actually, I didn't mean to raise my hand. I think this is really fascinating and interesting, and you've gotten me thinking about a lot of stuff. So I'm just going to continue to listen. Thanks.
Oh, okay, no worries. I didn't want you to think that you were excluded from the conversation. So no, thanks for that. So the other thing, one of the things that that you mentioned, you get a little bit kind of theoretical in your book towards the end, which I absolutely loved, because it made a lot of sense to me. But I know a lot of people go, oh no, especially if Denise talks about it, then it must be something that's a bit too theoretical. But it made a lot of sense to me, because it pointed to what's going on behind the scenes, what's going on in not just in theory, but in the sociology of, if you like, of how we operate, how we work together. And you talk about the binaries of science, and you say that the domination of science is an ideology of gender and race, and I think that's a very powerful statement. And you talk about how the white domination of an oil and gas company as a scientific enterprise is reinforced. And I think these are really powerful statements that I hope that when people are reading the book, that they don't get lost by thinking, oh, this is just about the theory, because it's about how the theory actually impacts our how we're operating and what we're actually gaining. Because if we think about the fact, about, we talk about gendered organizations, we talk about the fact that we've tried to put in place diversity over the last 50 years or so, and we've barely moved the needle, and yet you still get lots of articles that are saying, oh, we've got 3 more women on boards. This is insignificant in terms of the type of energy that has been put into this whole discussion. So would you like to talk about that binaries of science? Because I really found it interesting that when you look at one model and you look at the second model, and then both models are actually the same, and what the opposition to those models are, you just see male and female, you see the gendered, you see the race as well. So would you like to share some of that information with us?
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Denise. I'm really happy to hear that hit home. That part of the book was actually kind of an add-on because of something a reviewer said to me. A reviewer who read the book and wrote and said, this doesn't make sense. There's something fundamentally irrational going on in this industry that you're describing. Why on earth would a company put all of these resources into hiring women only to chuck them out at the first sign of, instability or unprofitability? I mean, that's just irrational. And, I just sat and I go, it is. that really is. I mean, I'm a scientist and I'm like, I don't really understand what's going on. And then I got into this more theoretical or philosophical literature on what I'm calling the binaries of science, where people argue that in our society, the characteristics that are associated with science and engineering are characteristics like being objective, being universal, being unemotional, being, just down the line, what does it mean to be a scientist? What it means that, you care about the facts and the objectivity of the situation. And what does it mean to be a non-scientist? It means you're soft, you're subjective, you're, you don't care about universals, you're in the moment more, you're more people focused. Those characteristics of science and non-science map perfectly on our society's definitions of masculinity and femininity. So there's a way in which, and when people conceptualize what a scientist is, women have a lot of trouble embodying that ideal because we're perceived as embodying the anti-science. So even when I come up with my, observations and conclusions about the industry, I'm always in danger of being told, oh, but you're a woman, you're subjective, you have a point of view, you have, an interest at stake. So you're not as scientific, you're a soft science, all of those prejudices come to bear. And I think women in the industry have the same thing happening to them. When they stand up, when they object, when they give their point of view, they're too easily dismissed as being or embodying something other than a pure scientist. Just by virtue of being women, they're seen as being subjective and soft and emotional and not, the kind of hard-headed scientific person that men more easily embody. And not all men, like you point out, it's mostly white men who are able to fit into this particular image.
Right. And I see, I mean, that whole discussion could go on for hours, and I'm sure there'd be, a number of us who want to get right into the nitty gritty of it. But Linda, you put your hand up. What would you like to say? I know you've been itching, and Linda is our Vice President of Lean In Energy.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, everyone. Yes, likewise. So Christine, one important factor for me is just to think about, is it too late to address some of these gender biases once you get into the corporate world, or do we need to do more as a society and maybe in early education to address some of these items? Because I almost feel like like with other things, right, it's harder to learn a new language than if you learn it earlier, etc. And some of these biases that we bring, both males and females bring biases into the workplace. And so I often ask myself, is it really the employer's responsibility to change some of these biases that are coming in more from this society? So maybe if you can speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. I mean, I agree with you that, this is a big issue. This is not something that, a firm can fix. Psychologists do these studies where they ask kindergartners to draw a picture of a scientist, and, they always draw a man. It's like it doesn't matter if they've just been, told about a woman scientist, they'll still draw a man. And that really, goes to show just how deeply some of these stereotypes are embedded. And yeah, I mean, educators have to, do a better job. Actually, they're doing a pretty good job right now, in my opinion, but they have to continually work at, countering these ubiquitous stereotypes in our children. But children actually aren't in charge of these decisions. It's adults. And, we can learn, and we have learned. And if you're, sentient, there are powerful women scientists out there who have won every award of their disciplines. So, I mean, yeah, they're culturally embedded, but they're also, I mean, if we really are scientists, we can be swayed by facts. And these people who are heading up oil and gas companies are scientists and engineers. Some are in finance, but even so, I mean, they have educations. They've learned, and that's part of what it means to be a professional, is to be constantly learning. So, do they have a responsibility to fix this? Yes, I think they do. And I think they do because when you hire someone, I think that there is a commitment that if they do the work for you, if they do good work for you, you keep them on and you treat them with dignity and respect. And if you have to lay off, and that's an open question to me, because a lot of companies around the world do not lay off. They are not allowed to lay off. So this whole idea that oil and gas has to lay off, I'm not with you on that. I mean, with the industry on that particular issue. But when they do, let's give us some transparency. Show us the numbers. I mean, it's easy. It's just like it's in certain countries of Europe now, companies are required to report on the wage gap. I think they should here. They don't have that mandate here. Show us the numbers. Give us the facts. Show us that it's across the board, and then it's not 75% of the women with young children being laid off compared to 20% of the men. Just show us the facts. And that's all they have to do. And as soon as they're required to do something like that, I think that suddenly the penny will start to drop, and you will see more responsibility being shown about what is legally mandated. It's illegal to discriminate in employment on the basis of gender. I have to keep reminding people of that fact, that they get away with it because they can. And all of this cultural support enables them to continue to make these decisions that, not surprisingly, benefits them.
Okay, and I think that Carla, you have a question or a statement or a query?
Yeah, a bit of both. So first of all, thank you for this. It resonates with me. I have 37 years in the oil and gas industry, in the energy industry. So, as you were talking, I was actually writing myself notes thinking, okay, what's the counter to what she's saying? And, is there an argument on the other side? And as I continued to think about it, I really was not able to come up with a sound, justified counter because I've lived it and I've seen it. And I think a couple of things. One is, I don't think your research necessarily only applies to scientists. I think it probably applies to all professionals in the industry, but I know that you were just targeting scientists, but from personal experience, I think it probably applies to all professionals. And, I struggle, just like what you talked about, with the fact that, they talk a lot about DEI, and if you read all of the companies' public information, you would think that it would be exactly the opposite because of what they put out in the public, which is not necessarily the case. But, as a professional, when you see these issues, you want to solve the problem. And I'm not seeing an easy solution, and I'm not seeing what we can do here. But, we can have this conversation. The material is great, but we've got to have other people in the room having the conversation, the decision makers, not just us. So, I wonder how we can take that next step to make that happen, to take action.
Thank you so much for that. This is one of the things I love about studying scientists and engineers, is this can-do attitude. It's like, you've given me a problem, I'm going to solve it now. I can't be given a problem without sort of the impulse to figure out what the solution is, and I want it now.
Yeah,
This
exactly.
has been going on for too long, and all of these efforts to change it have not worked at all. So we want to colonize Mars. There's a problem. It's going to take a lot of work, a lot of minds coming together. My own advice is really, really simple. It's just this transparency idea. I mean, it's 100% simple. No more of these, signing away your right to sue as a condition for severance. Make companies report on the wage gap, make companies report on the layoff numbers. I think those are really simple solutions that could work, because companies would have to, explain themselves if it comes out that women are earning, 80% of what men earn, if, women are targeted for layoffs, with mothers really bearing the brunt of those layoffs. The other thing that was so weird about the women who were retained in my study was, not only were they not mothers, as Denise pointed out, a number of them were married to men scientists at the company. So I started to think that their own retention was a form of benefit for the men who were considered top performers. It's like having a husband in the industry that was highly valued actually got you some points. towards being retained. I'd like to see the numbers on that. You know, nobody's sharing numbers on something like that. And I think that the more that these facts come out, I think the better the industry will behave. That's my answer. I actually don't think you can change hearts and minds. I mean, I wrote this book obviously because, I think it could make a difference, get people talking, like you say, but I don't think it's, especially in our divided America. I'm increasingly convinced that changing people's hearts and minds is not possible. The only thing we can do is compel behavior, and the transparency is what I think can drive that. And so far as we still have laws outlawing gender discrimination in employment and racial discrimination in employment, show me the numbers that you're not discriminating. I don't think we're going to turn CEOs of oil industries into feminists, no matter how hard I try, how hard Sheryl Sandberg tried. It ain't going to happen.
But I also don't think that we're going to convince the oil and gas companies to turn over that information and provide that transparency without them being forced to do it. It's
right.
not something they will voluntarily do.
Yeah, so that's why I think, I mean, we could just go and write a letter to them and they throw it away. But if we lobby our politicians to do something like this, I mean, that they can mandate it in a way we can't. And of course, if they knew that we were doing that, they'd fire us, right?
and the thing is too, I know from speaking with Elizabeth Gregory, professor in gender studies at University of Houston, that one of the things that in Houston that they're doing is that the mayor has put forward that there will be 6 months leave for maternity leave or paternity leave, whatever, and parental leave, and by making it public policy that way, that hopefully that other companies will follow. And so it'll be interesting to track to see whether or not companies do actually follow that that policy guideline. But that's an example of whether you think 6 months is long enough or not is absolutely irrelevant. I think it's more that there's an attempt to produce some political change, some policy change, I should say, and then see if corporates, particularly in Houston, will follow that. So we've only got 5 minutes left or so. So I wanted to firstly to thank everyone for being here, and also for Christine for being so willing to address really critical issues in the discussion. And I think it really points to getting to the heart of things, not just talking superficially about a diversity program or an unconscious bias program. And Christine, I know one of the things that you've said in one of your previous sessions was there is no such thing as unconscious bias. It's all bias. And so that's a whole separate discussion, I know. But what I will say is that two other things that we didn't get a real chance to discuss was the fact that what occurs in the US is not only relevant to the US, there are phenomena which are occurring worldwide, and that are impacting women. And secondly, that you also say in your book that there is no STEM shortage. And I know in some of the research that I've done, it's definitely identifying that, and the reasoning that women aren't getting beyond their their mid careers. Not only they're choosing to leave their jobs, but they're choosing to leave their industry sectors, and that's a major issue, because the career transition, the energy transition, is constantly referring to this STEM shortage, and we really need to take that in hand and talk about it more seriously and better. But I do want to thank you, Christine. I appreciate you taking your time out of your vacation in cooler San Francisco area to be with us. You've been a delight to work with. I hope that we can continue the relationship, because I've been looking online and I know that there are some other things that you've written, articles, etc., which I'm devouring at the moment. I just want to thank you, because you've really given to Lean In Energy a great standpoint that we can look seriously at things as opposing to the superficial stuff, and I think that will make a difference, and we'll find an answer. It may not be an easy one, but we're going to get there, because there's a lot of good women who've got a lot at stake in this. So thank you, Christine.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, don't think I'm going to get a chance to put up our details, but Linda, can you just tell us quickly what's the best way to join us as a member?
Yes, so there is a link on the Lean In Organization's website, and also on our website. So leaninenergy.org is our main website, and in that website there should be a link where you can click to become a member. Membership process is very easy. Basically, we ask for your name and your email address, and then that way you'll get notifications on upcoming events, etc. Our membership is there's no cost associated with it, and we really want you to engage with the community, attend our events, and if you are able to do so, also to volunteer with the organization, as we are a 100% volunteer-based organization.
So Michelle, Elizabeth, Amy, and Carla, looking forward to seeing your names as members. Even if you've already been there, we're going to look to make sure that you are already a member. If you're not, you need to be. And if you really would like to volunteer with us, we would love to have you. We have great fun, but it is a lot of work. So take care, everyone, and enjoy the summer if we don't see you before then.
Thank you. Thank you for the discussion.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Denise, you'll save the recording?
Yeah, I'm just waiting for it. It normally shows up something that says about recording's finished. So hold on, let me just. You're going to go?
Yes.
Okay, no worries. I'm here.
Okay.